Hi everyone. It's Bob Ost. It's Friday in December. It's December what? It's December 15th. And this is the TRU Community Gathering. Gee, I hope it is December 15th. I looked at my calendar. I could be wrong. Um, we do this every week. We do this every Friday since April 17th, 2020. We started doing community gatherings as a way to help people feel less isolated during COVID. And this is our 187th consecutive conversation about theater.
Bravo.
So yeah, thank you, Dave. I don't know how or why, but I'm still going. The Energizer Bunny here. We were originally talking about COVID and isolation and all that sort of stuff, and we've moved into what is resembling the normal world. He said, being aware of the fact that at least 5 of my friends have COVID right now. But COVID's not as much of a danger as it used to be, although it is still dangerous for some people. So this is my weekly reminder to everybody: be conscious of other people, and be careful. Just be careful. It's still out there. I'd like to let everybody know out there who's just sort of stumbling upon us from YouTube or our podcast. Welcome. I'm glad to have you with us as well. I'd love to actually meet you. So if you want to actually be part of this, you can email me and I'll put you on the Zoom list, and you'll get invited every week. You can email me at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com. Love to meet you all, and thanks for being with us today. And we're going to have a conversation that is not really COVID related at all, which is what we've been doing lately. We're going to have a conversation about the development process, an illness in itself. And I have 2 people with me today who certainly are well-versed in not only producing in New York, but also in London. And we're going to talk about what the title of this is. Was it better in Britain? A couple of weeks ago, we had some Australian and British producers who were with us, and they were talking about how frustrating they found New York for developing new works, and what the advantages were in Britain. However, they also added that it's damned difficult in Britain as well. So Martin and David are old friends of TRU, and they've been teachers and run our producer development and mentorship class in the past. Last semester, you actually taught the master class again, and you might be doing it, who knows when, again in the future, depending on Jane's schedule. Heard great things about you. You always make the students very happy and excited and inspired. So I'm going to challenge you to be inspiring today. Tell us a little. Okay.
Oh, fine. I see.
Well,
I should also mention that Dave was on the TRU board once upon a time.
I was on the TRU board. That's true.
So tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us how you guys met and why you started working together and all that sort of stuff, and then we'll get into London.
Okay, I'll be quick because it's Martin. I always like to say I was Tom Sawyered into meeting Martin. Pat Blake and I were co-running a theater down in Tribeca that's no longer there. Pat Blake, I mean. He and I were in business for a while. We did a lot of shows together. Kind of a glorious part of my career. And Martin was coming over for APAP. For those of you that see presenters annual that happens every January, Martin was so apt that Martin's been talking about London, because Martin was in London for 10 years. Came over to New York with 4 shows to present for APAP. And there's a dear guy named Andrew McTiernan, who's sadly no longer with us, who had told Martin, oh, there's this guy I'm working with. He will help you get your shows on. He knows all about the theater. He can, take your 4 shows and he'll put them on. And didn't tell me any of this. Martin walks into our office and hands me a binder with a tech writer. For those of you most of you know what a tech writer is. This is basically the specs that you need to get a show on. So if you're doing a show on the road, a tech writer always gets sent. It's part of the advance, where the lights go, sound requirements, et cetera, so that when you were touring, by the time you actually arrive with your cast, that stuff has all been sorted. Well, I looked at Martin and said, okay, come into the theater. So, it's like Tom Sawyer, who was, painting the fence and got his friends to do it all. Andrew McTiernan told Martin that he'll take care of it and handed it off to me.
And you
but
did.
It started a relationship with Martin when he was still in London, and Pat and I were still working together in New York, which we still did. I think that was like 2099, maybe.
He's not talking.
And 2001, when 9/11 happened, the theater shut down. It was sort of on the other side of West Broadway. Anyway, so Martin moved to New York 2003?
2002. No,
2002,
I came over in June to do that show at the Mint.
That's right. And we were walking down Perry Street, and where I lived, and he pointed at the Perry Street Theater sign and said, "What's the story with that place?" And I said, "It's really sad. It's been dark for 10 years. But it's last I remember seeing a show in there. It was this beautiful theater. I don't know if it's a theater anymore." And Martin called me a week later and said, "We have a meeting." I put a note in the mailbox. And so we went into this theater. We got an unbelievable deal, produced a few shows in there. And then when they sold the building, we moved uptown and changed the name from Perry Street Theater Company to Perry Street Theatricals. And that's when we really started getting into much more commercial stuff, and a lot more general management. So we GM'd on our own shows, but then we got hired to GM a show at the Atlantic second stage, and that sort of put our shingle out to the world. And since then, we did a lot of general managing and producing together. But that's how we met.
Okay, and Martin, I know for a fact. Well, I don't know for a fact. I believe that your roots are actually more in not-for-profit, as I recall. And
yeah, so I grew up in California, and went to Carnegie Mellon. And when my draft number was 218, I didn't have to go to grad school because I wasn't going to be drafted. So I took a job with a community theater in Alabama, of all places. It just happened to be the only town in Alabama that it was post-Reconstruction. It was founded by Yankees. It was the WAC training base, the old Women's Army Corps was there. And there are a lot of Yankees. So it had the only newspaper in the former Confederacy that endorsed McGovern for president. That's how different this town was from the rest of Alabama. And the first summer I was there, I started the Alabama Shakespeare Festival so I could make a living, I thought. I spent 18 years there in the not-for-profit world. Then I started a theater in Birmingham, ran the opera company there, then took over a theater in New Mexico and started a festival there. And woke up one morning in, like, I don't know what year it was, in the 90s, and said, I never want to go to a board meeting again as long as I live. And moved to England and formed a partnership with a British producer I'd met. And I was there for 5 years living there.
So the interesting thing about you guys is that you have a history of producing in both London and the United States, and I think you've developed pieces on both sides of the ocean, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just jump in. Let me let you know that Neil Gooding, Katie Lipson, and Patrick Racy, I think those are my three panelists a couple weeks ago. They all agreed that it's much easier to develop work in London than it is in New York. That said, they also said that it's pretty impossible in London too, or there's a lot of challenges. Can you just give us an overview of what you think are the best routes, and are there things that need to be produced that are better suited to be developed in the United States, or do you think that anything really just needs to go over to London and save a fortune?
Well, I think the overarching issue, which I think they may have talked about in that session too, is that since 2019, the inflation rate has been 20%. So everything costs 20% more now than it did in 2019. That's just the starting point. But that means that a play on Broadway which cost 3.5 million to produce in 2019, should cost $4.2 million a day. But it doesn't. It costs $6 million. And the inflation in musicals is just as bad, and the numbers are much worse. Which means it takes much, much longer to recoup. So a lot of money to raise. And without the tax credit, which we have, which will run out at some point, it literally, not being alarmist, but without the tax credit, it makes producing a play on Broadway an impossible business proposition. Because a play cannot run long enough to earn the money back.
So let me just say, though, not just
It's
in
just
terms
a
of not in terms of just the production, the commercial production itself, but I mean, I really want to also look at the development process as well, because there are steps that we take before we have to come up with $15 million to do a Broadway show. What is the path like here, and what is the path like in UK? Starting from you find a property that you love.
I mean, I think in the UK, they're not as enamored of having 12 readings and 4 developmental productions. You kind of write a show, and when it's ready, you get a theater and you do it. Whereas we tend to spend, 4 or 5 years doing all these other steps. And like right now, I'm working on a musical that's doing a presentation in January. And it's working on the Off-Broadway League side letter, developmental side letter, to do a reading with 3 weeks rehearsal, right? Just a reading. It's costing $175,000 to do that. And we're not throwing any money away on anything. That's just what it costs.
And what's your average, Martin, remind me what the average cost of, so what's the actors are getting paid for that reading? That's on the side letter. What?
$550 a week.
$550. Okay.
Plus benefits.
Right, of course.
So this is one of the 4 development, the 4 tiered
right.
developmental. So talk a little bit about those.
They're called levels in the Off-Broadway League. So if you're a member of the Off-Broadway League, you can use their side letter for development. And level 1, which I worked on a project with Pat on last year or this year, you're allowed 2 weeks of rehearsal. And the actors are paid $500, and you can do, I think, 3 presentations. But you're allowed to rehearse 35 hours a week. Oh, sorry, in that contract, 30 hours a week. But you can pay extra and do up to 40 hours a week. So it's a huge advantage over a 29-hour 1-week reading that we all did, especially for musicals, because in the 29-hour reading, there's barely time for the people to learn the music, let alone work on the book scenes. We've always done it.
Let me jump in with a technicality for everybody who doesn't know it. He's talking about a weekly contract with, I assume it's equity. When we talk about showcases and other things where actors are just getting a stipend, it's never referred to as a contract. So just know, first of all, this is the first
code.
Yeah, this is the step where you finally get into the contract, which means weekly salary plus payroll and health and benefits and all that sort of stuff. So that's what a lot of us are kind of aspiring to. A lot of us have been getting as far as the showcase agreements.
Right.
So okay, I just wanted to fill in that blank.
So level 2, which we're doing with this musical in January, allows up to 4 weeks of rehearsal. This project is doing 3 weeks, and it allows you to have up to 6 choreographed numbers. It still has to be on book, except during the choreographed numbers, but you can choreograph up to 6 numbers as part of the reading.
Just as an insert on a 29-hour reading, which I'm sure you know something about or certainly attended, maybe participated in, you are not allowed any choreography. So if you're doing a musical, it's just music stands, lines, singing, usually just to a piano. This allows you to actually mount certain numbers legally.
And you pay a slight extra.
Response to Michelle, no, it's $550 a week. It becomes a contract when there's a weekly salary that's being paid to an actor. Otherwise, equity does not consider it a contract.
But so it's $550 a week plus anyone involved in the staging of a musical number, choreography, including always the two stage managers, get $25 a week additional for every musical number they're part of, a choreography they're part of.
For each, okay.
Yes. So if you're a principal and you're in 3 dance numbers, then you're getting an extra $75 a week. So that kind of adds up like that. And then there's another category above that where you don't do the whole show, but you're working on production elements specifically. Could be choreography, it could be technical things. They're all different levels. The advantage is, and a lot of us use these for shows that are really aimed for Broadway, because I can't remember the distance, but if you use the Off-Broadway League side letter and the show goes to Broadway, not off-Broadway, within a certain length of time, which I don't remember, a year or 2 years, then you have to pay all those people the difference between the $550 and what you would have paid using the Broadway developmental deal. Because they're basically saying, you use this to save money, but you're doing it on Broadway, so you have to pay them what you should have paid them because you're actually doing a Broadway workshop.
So can we take a step backwards, because we didn't talk about level 1? So do you know?
Level 1, you can rehearse 2 weeks. No, there's no choreography, and it's basically the 29-hour reading, but with salaries. And you can rehearse 2 weeks, 30 hours, or it's $500. So $500 divided by 30 is they consider the hourly rate. You can pay that hourly to people for an additional 10 hours a week. So you can actually do 40 hours a week.
I mean, it really just gives you the time to properly rehearse a show. I mean, I can just say anecdotally that when we did the Blood and Fire presentation for TRU, there was so much music in that show that we just couldn't finish it in 29 hours. So we did parts of the second act, as I recall. And we never, because that was also all recitative, and that was a much more complicated show. But it's just one of those things that this level 1 reading, which, you know, as Martin says, it's like a 29 an hour, but you've got a little more rehearsal time. I mean, it allows you to properly rehearse a show.
And the other reason for using the Off-Broadway side letter is, even if you really know you're aiming for Broadway, is that in the Off-Broadway development deal, actors cannot miss rehearsals for MRE, more remunerative employment. Like if they get a shoot on a film, they can't do it. Whereas every other equity contract except Broadway, you can do that. But on this developmental deal, you have to actually show up. You can't get an out, and there are no attachments. You have no responsibility to use that actor again, and you have no responsibility to give them any percentage of the show's profits later because they participated in the first developmental production. All of that's in the Broadway version, but not in the Off-Broadway version.
So this is for all 4 levels of this agreement? This agreement. So all 4 levels. Okay, that's a big advantage.
It's really significant, folks. Just to repeat it, just because if you've ever worked on a show as a producer and had an actor get a day of shoot on a TV show, say it's a big impact on your rehearsal process. So
you don't have to give 48 hours notice to do it.
So that's significant.
Okay, so that's kind of like the initial steps of development here in the States. Can you contrast that with the UK? What do you do in the UK? How do you make things happen in the UK?
I mean, you can do that. When we did Lending to Tenor, we did the equivalent of a full Broadway workshop. 4 weeks rehearsal, some mock-ups are part of the scenery, the whole show, it's fully staged without the off-book. And that probably cost us in England at the time.
This is 2010, mind you.
Yeah, it cost us maybe $70,000. And in 2010 in New York, that would have cost $400,000.
So
to do under equity.
We did establish with the producers a couple of weeks ago that the costs are startlingly lower to do anything in UK. Can you talk a little bit about that, about contrasting? You sent me a wonderful email where you actually were very specific about how much it would cost you here and how much it would cost you there.
Can I share a screen?
Yeah, I will make you a co-host.
Hold on to your hats, folks.
Dave, will you have a screen share also? Or do you know?
No. I know what Martin's about to present.
I just did this today. So the bold, if you can see this, the bold face are Broadway salaries. So in the West End, if you're in the largest theater in the West End, the minimum for an actor is just over $1,000 a week.
Now keep in mind, this is with an exchange rate of 1.25 around today, which is
but those are dollars, right? So
yeah, these are all dollars.
And for actors in America is $2,500 a week. The really startling one always, stage managers, again, it's a little more than double. But in England, it doesn't matter whether you stage manage a musical or a play, it's $1,200 is the minimum. On Broadway, the stage manager of a musical minimum is $4,167 a week. That's $200,000 a year. So if you're stage managing a musical that's running for a long time, you're probably earning $250,000 a year or more in America. And in England, you're earning $50,000 a year. It's a huge difference, as one can tell. Beck 2 is their IATSE. And you see that the stagehands in America are making anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 times what their counterparts in the UK are making.
The doorman? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the doorman, yeah.
$660 to $2,157?
Yeah.
All right, that's a leap.
Well, but look at the director and the choreographer.
Oh boy.
Yeah, 77,000 for a musical on Broadway, 8,300. Now these are minimums, but the trick about minimums is that they inform what somebody with a great reputation earns, right? So on Broadway, a really big director might get $250,000 to do a show, almost 4 times this minimum. Same in England, but that's $32,000, not $250,000. And the same with choreographers. It's a drastic difference. And the same, and with designers, again, the difference is huge.
Well, let's go back to directors for a second. I'm curious. Does the UK have an equivalent of SSDC? Society?
No, in England, directors belong to equity.
Directors are part of equity. Okay, this is new. I didn't know that.
Equity is actors, stage managers, and directors.
Wow. Okay. And yet all of the...
Now remember, a lot of these bold numbers are without benefits. I mean, they're all without benefits. So
in addition to, so this plus the 6, what is it, 8% or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Well, you've got, you have, but on Broadway it's drastically more than that, but technically 8% pension, more or less, about $200 a week in health benefits. You have to make mandatory contributions to 401k. It goes on and on. Vacation pay goes on and on and on. In the UK, there's a little bit of vacation pay, and you pay national insurance, which is their version of Medicare. You pay into the National Health Service on behalf of your employees. That's it. So the benefit package is about 1/3 of what the benefit package is on Broadway.
So when we're talking about a developmental production, we're not talking about something that jumps right to Broadway. We're talking about something that's probably being done maybe in a regional theater or in an enhancement deal. So it's not, we're not necessarily talking about Broadway numbers yet. I mean, that's eventually.
No, but I just think it was worth, I think, looking at the exercise just to see ultimately how, when you talk about why it's so much cheaper, because I'm sure you did last week with your panel, ultimately for West End versus Broadway. I mean, it's a dramatic, as you could see. So it's like 9-10 times. It's 9-10 times just on those contracts.
Are the
in the case of director,
are the numbers that you quoted on your screen share Are they for British commercial productions? And is there something before you get to a commercial production in the UK that you would be spending less money on?
Yeah.
And it looks very attractive. I mean, the British numbers look very attractive already, but
yeah, it's called TMA, which is a Theater Management Association, and that's kind of the equivalent of LORT here. Although it does deal with commercial and non-commercial outside of London. The rates are the same. In you know, if you're at any of the big subsidized theaters, then you're paying TMA rates, which are not that much below the West End rates in the larger theaters. It's about the same.
oh, okay. So the development process, again, I'm trying to pull away the final commercial production from the development, and talk about the road that you're traveling before you get to Broadway, the road that you're traveling before you get to a West End theater. Even at that level, you're also talking about huge savings. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, when we did our musical, how many years ago was that, Dave? What year was that?
2011 in the West End, and 2010 was our developmental production out of town at the Theatre Royal in Plymouth.
So our musical cost just under $6 million to produce, all in, including the development in Plymouth.
Oh, that's actually worth noting for everybody in the room. When you do your final budget for your commercial production, you usually fold into it the developmental costs that took place before you get to Broadway or get to the West End.
Yeah, because you have investors all during that process, and no matter how early they invest, they're entitled to participate in profits, if any, or recoupment, if any, from the production when you finally do it. But so like in Plymouth, I think we spent a million and a half of that 6 million we gave to Plymouth to enhance the building of scenery and costumes and all the stuff for a major West End musical. We actually built the West End show in Plymouth.
The entire thing.
This is actually something I was wondering. So the UK does have the equivalent of an enhancement deal. You do enhancement.
Well, Plymouth did, because, I mean, yes, they do, but Plymouth was particularly advantageous to us because, I mean, I say this with having only been told this by our production manager and general manager, but has arguably the best shop in the UK. So they built our set and all of our costumes, knowing we were going to ultimately move to the UK. And they built our sets, as I recall, to tour in the event that we had a big hit and we wanted to tour them. So that was all part of it as well.
They have a separate building at Plymouth, remote from the theater, but in Plymouth, which has, I think, 3 rehearsal halls. The big rehearsal hall, which feeds into their main theater, which is like a West End sized theater. So we're doing Lemmy Tenor the musical with motorized scenery and all this stuff. And when we walked in for the first day of rehearsal, the set had been built and was in the rehearsal hall and was motorized.
Okay, compare that to US. When would you have the set here?
Well, about a week after you move into the theater, if you're lucky.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so it was huge. I mean, we are and because this is a farce, as most of you know, it's a lot of doors slamming, and they were slamming the correct doors. Like, this is the set that ultimately moved to London. So, but
also in Plymouth, the costume shop is across the hall from the rehearsal studio. The prop shop is down the hall. So the whole, rather than in London where everything is jobbed out to small shops, like you might have 15 different costume makers making different parts of your show, and the sets in 5 different places because the motors are being made by one shop. In Plymouth, it's all being made right in the same building that you're rehearsing in. So it really makes that process, it streamlines it and saves you a lot of money.
Okay, so we've talked about the developmental contracts. I just want to ask anybody in the room if you have any questions about that so far, because I'm going to ask some other questions. So if you have something that you want clarified, or if you have something you want to mention, and Ross,
here's a question: do audiences in the UK enjoy American themed content / plays? I think, yeah. I mean, they do a lot of revivals of American plays, and unfortunately, they didn't enjoy our American themed musical quite as much as we would have liked.
Well, there are examples of American musicals that don't do very well here, but do great over there. This one running now, I can't remember what it is, but
Groundhog Day.
is it Groundhog Day? Yeah, I know there's something that's a huge hit over there that was just like meh here. And
there were shows here, like Spring Awakening, that died a cruel death there.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, Legally Blonde was on the West End when we were working over there, and I didn't love it when I saw it on Broadway, and it was such a good production in the UK.
It was much better.
Well, there's the
Really
unknown.
good.
There's the unknown variable. It's
Well, that's the thing. I mean, she was really.
Is it the show
it
or
all
is it the
depend-
production?
Well,
Sheridan Smith was brilliant as Elle Woods, but I mean, and that helped because that she's got to carry that show.
Who was it?
I mean,
How many theaters are there in the West End?
It's around the same as here, around 40.
Well,
here's one difference, Bob. I would just point out quickly about musicals in the West End. Not every musical, but a great number of them. Is if anybody's been fortunate enough to see the revival of Merrily We Roll Along. I know the orchestra seats are $800 now, but
I know I can't afford it.
I saw it again last night. I saw it downtown. I saw it again. But what is startling, among other things about it, is all the actors are playing recognizable human beings subtly. No one is screaming at you. Nobody is hopping up and down and dancing for 4 hours. They treat musicals as plays that happen to have songs in them. And it's a real different dynamic. So a lot of American musicals, like Legally Blonde, that was a big cartoon here. In England, all the same characters saying the same lines and the same songs appeared like human beings. And the show was much more involving because they weren't doing that Broadway in your face thing, which is.
We had a conversation with, I don't remember who it was that told us this, but we've talked about this before, that they're also really enamored with movie musicals in the UK. And what we learned from talking to somebody was that, and again, this was probably his opinion, but I think it bears a, is that they really want to see the movie in the UK, and in America, they want to see something done with it. So it's not quite the movie. Like they really want to, they want things to be very true to form over there. So be curious to see how, for example, has Tootsie gone to the West End?
Yeah.
How did it do?
Or it's on tour. I can't remember which.
Because it was very different than from the movie I found. But so I was always curious to see how that one might have done.
Kate Danley asks an interesting question. Do you need to partner with a UK-based producer in order to do business in the UK? And the reason why I think it's an interesting question is because Neil and Katie both talked about how important it was to have relationships with the theaters there.
I would just say that I can't stress it enough. I mean, Martin and I were the two leads on the show. Martin had worked there and Martin had a lot of contacts, but I think one of the things that worked against us, aside from Cameron McIntosh, was, and I mean this, was very against our show, and I think operated behind the scenes to try to scuttle our production. And I'm not just being paranoid. Is that if you've got a London partner, you've got a British partner on your show that sort of helps give you that British imprimatur, that stamp, that it's also just a lot easier to open avenues with a British partner. I mean, they know the territory, to quote Meredith Willson, right? So especially if you've never worked there. I mean, I would never have suggested, we were going to do the show on Broadway when the Araka group revived the play that our musical was based on. And so when Martin and I were talking about what to do, and I mean, I said, you were there for 10 years and Let Me a Tenor actually opened there originally. We just figured that it would work there. And that's why we did it. But I don't think I would have even had the conversation if I had not known that Martin worked in the UK already. I mean, I think it's really important to have somebody on the ground that aside from just your general manager.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think Neil made a big point of the fact that it's very hard to get a theater if you don't know the theater owners. That one of the stumbling blocks, even for people that work in the UK, is having relationships with the theater owners.
But that's certainly no different here.
Well, it's even worse here, probably.
Oh, I mean, yes, it's very hard here.
But I mean, the thing they have in the UK that we don't really have is if you have a show, more plays than musicals. that doesn't need to run for 12 years, that, you know, could kind of wash its hands, make its money back in a 12 or 16 week run in the UK. It's much easier to get a theater there for a short fixed run than it is if you say to a theater owner, well, we're going to open, we hope to run 2 years. It's very hard to get a theater.
Well, to go back to your list of costs, one of the things that prohibits long runs here in the city in New York is the running costs, the weekly running costs. So basically, your salaries are much easier to recoup your investment, and then also make a profit in London based on the numbers you showed us. I mean, night and day, actually. And that's one of the reasons why nothing seems to make money here in less than a year. Although that's an overstatement, but there's some truth to it.
I'm looking at RK's question, which is, aren't there additional costs, including airfare and housing, that you wouldn't have in the US? We used an English cast when we were in the UK.
This is one of the tricks of doing shows in the UK. I mean, you saw the difference in salaries. And unless you've got a big star you want to take over, and that's a different story.
Lately.
But you should basically try to take nobody over from the US, because most people from the US have agents who will want you to pay them the US salaries, even though they're working in a place where those unions have no jurisdiction and you don't have to. But you say to an American director, you want you to direct a West End play for $10,000, they'll laugh at you. And they'll ask for $50,000. Whereas if you're casting, I mean, it's like anything else. If you're doing business in the UK, you need to do business on their terms. Otherwise, the advantage of the lower costs disappear. And a lot of American producers have gone over there and taken a lot of Americans, and the shows have cost 50, 75% more than they should, and they lose their money because they weren't willing to make their show in the UK, really.
Both Roy O'Neill and Patrick Blake are bringing up the audience perspective on this, which is, are the ticket prices comparably lower in UK than they are here?
Yeah, I mean, less lower than they used to be. That's for sure. There's some show opening. What was it? Some show opening. It might be the Ken Branagh King Lear, but some show that had a $350 top ticket in London, which caused a huge brouhaha over there.
As opposed to the back row of the balcony for Merrily We Roll Along at 209 here in the US right now.
But I think in London, prices for the most part for a big musical would top out around 200, as opposed to 400 or 500 here now. But the other big difference is they still scale down. So in the UK, even if the top price is high, when you get into the less desirable seats, the prices still go way down and are affordable for normal mortals. Whereas in Broadway, they're not anymore. You know, the last row of the balcony is what the front of the orchestra was 8 years ago.
Ross, you want to catch us up on some of the questions from the room and comments?
Sure, give me a sec. What sort of visa did you have to get as a producer?
I think this has changed. I'm not going to bother to look it up, but at the time we had to get entrepreneur visas.
Yes, that's
and
right.
You had to prove that you had at least, I think, $250,000 each in your business bank account that you could transfer to the UK if you wanted to. So David and I had already sent all the money for the show to the UK. So we had to have them send it back. So it would be in our US bank account. So we could say it's there and we own the bank account, so we can do whatever we want with it. And we got these visas. I don't know that even exists anymore. I think you.
I will say it made going through customs pretty easy.
Yeah,
having a visa, you get right through.
No, there still is one. Yeah. So yeah, you still have to apply to start a business in the UK. You still have to get an entrepreneur visa. It's just slightly different than one we got.
Rob Hoffman was wondering earlier whether Sunset Boulevard is doing well on the West End. Do you know? mean, just because you guys produce in the West End doesn't mean you know
Don't know.
everything that's going on there.
Don't know.
No.
I want to get to the projects that you emailed me about as well. Oh, here.
Wait, Jane's got a question.
Jane has a question.
Jane's
Yeah.
raised a question. Yeah.
Do you think the demand from the US to produce there will cause excess demand on personnel and prices of things to increase?
Well, I think, we're hearing anecdotally. I mean, the first thing I'll say is, and I'm not exaggerating, in the last 3 or 4 months, every single actual producer and co-producer, big investor or fundraiser I've talked to have said, without being prompted, that they're not planning to invest or produce on Broadway anytime again in the near future. They'll do it in London, but there's basically virtually no possibility to get your money back on Broadway with the way costs are right now. And the shows that can make their money back, because they have the biggest star in the world, will not let most normal investors invest. They've got their own, if the show is going to, if you've got, if you had Tom Cruise in your play, that producer is not going to let mere mortals invest in that, because everybody knows they're going to make a bundle. So it gets more selective. If you're producing a play that we know is going to play to 40%, you'll think, come on in, come on. And just anecdotally, except for Harry Potter, there is no play running on Broadway that's meeting its costs, and they haven't been in forever, except for Leopoldstadt, maybe. It's just, it doesn't happen. Pearly Victorious had incredible reviews everywhere. It's a fabulous production, and they're selling about 60%.
Oh, that's shameful.
Those plays.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
If they put 20 songs in, and if they did the musical, if they revived Pearly, they might have done better.
Oh, okay. I Got Love.
Yeah, that's right.
John Ewing wants
Yeah.
to know, is the West End considered as prestigious as Broadway? It depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
If you're talking to people in UK, it's all about the West End. I mean, the Broadway is branded. Admittedly, Broadway is like the theater brand. What are your personal feelings, Dave and Martin, about West End versus Broadway? I mean, I think West End has a much more thriving and much more versatile, variable variety of shows going on than we do. We tend to go back to the same sorts of things over and over again here.
But I think it's also in the West End, there are drastically fewer shows that camp down and stay in theaters forever.
That's true.
Tying up real
It's much shorter runs, and it's planned that way.
I mean, Mamma Mia, Phantom, Les Mis, which will never close. But we have like 12
Chicago.
or 15 or more shows like that will never close, that run 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And in the golden era of Broadway, a hit musical ran 600 to 800 performances, less than 2 years. And you got your money back, and you made a profit, and you produced another show. You didn't say, I'm producing a musical for $30 million and it has to run 12 years. That's a very modern thing in the last 20, 30 years.
I mean, me personally, Bob, I'm kind of an Anglophile. I was really pretty enchanted by working over there, and I do tend to think that they do plays extraordinarily well, and more of them. But I mean, I just think we do musicals better here. We invented it. Musical theater is our invention, candidly. But although I will say, one day, I won't take too much time. I was on the plane going over. This guy said, English guy said, what are you doing going to England? I told him what we were working on, and he then started to wax poetically about Andrew Lloyd Webber and what a gift he was to the world and what the world owed to him. And I just started rattling off the Gershwins and Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and Sondheim, and Kander and Ebb. And I just went through the entire American, Irving Berlin. I just went through the American music, and the guy and I said, so yeah, Andrew Lloyd Webber's, he's done okay he's got his shows. I was like, but I think the musical theater owes its debt to America. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the flight, which was fine with me.
Well, this is a conversation in itself, and I've actually had it with David Fifth Avenue Theater, we had this conversation about the differences in the aesthetic between the American musical and the British musical. The intentions are different. Their histories and their derivations are actually different. I'm American, and I grew up on the American musical, and I like the way the American musical is put together, and how it is made to sing and tell stories. The British ones I don't always respond as well to. I think it's just personal taste, though. I don't know.
It's cultural, you know. It's just
It's cultural.
we used to different things, but I think the biggest difference of how they do musicals, because they do a lot of American musicals, right? They do revivals and stuff.
They do an annual Guys and Dolls and an annual Anything Goes.
Yeah. But in England, the difference is in America, you throw money at everything. Everything has to be perfect. Everybody has custom made shoes. Everybody has custom everything, and everything is perfect. In England, they don't care about that. They do the show, and they don't have the most perfect dancers in the world doing everything rigidly perfectly. It's all, again, it's more about people, and they do the shows, and the sets sometimes aren't always as beautifully built. They don't build them the last 20 years, and the costumes aren't, you can't always tell that, but they're not nearly as elaborately built and expensively built as people insist on doing on Broadway. They just don't, because why waste that much money? They want to put on a good show, get their money back, and do another show. And I've come to like that better in a way, because you're actually seeing something real on stage and not kind of being assaulted by the musical. But it's a different. Nobody in England would say, "Oh, gee, that set wasn't done perfectly. Oh, gee, that's not that." They never think of that. Whereas on Broadway, you get called out on everything.
A famous playwright, I can't remember it right now, once read an article for the Times about New York's home run mentality. She said basically our whole concept of success is hitting home runs, and she really made an argument for what's wrong with triples and you know.
You're so right, Bob. That's very astute. I think you're right. It's just, Broadway is not a place to try something out these days. It's just too expensive. There's such limited real estate. You know, by the way, Bob, you mentioned Guys and Dolls. I read that Richard Eyre, the former head of the National and great British theater maker, said it should be in an act of parliament that a production of Guys and Dolls is running somewhere in the United Kingdom at all times.
And it is
one of my favorite shows of all time. So I was okay with it.
Yeah, I don't know if I could see another one, but I don't know if I can see another Gypsy. I love Gypsy, but I don't. It's like every time another Gypsy comes up, it's like, oh no, and then I see it, and then I love it again.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, there are musicals in the American songbook, the American catalog that are just perfect. They are as close to perfect as they can possibly be. One of them is probably Guys and Dolls. Another, I think, is Gypsy and My Fair Lady. I mean, these are amazing shows. The aesthetic with the big broad London successes is it's just very different. It's based on the musical. It evolved from the musical theater.
Yeah, that tradition, absolutely, and the panto and all that. Yeah.
But, you know, when you think about British musicals, there are precious few British musicals that are massive worldwide hits. There's the Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals.
Me and My Girl.
Me and Michael, but that was an ancient musical. That was a revisal of an ancient musical, right? But
Love
then,
that show.
You know, their other series of hits were written by Frenchmen. Bubla and Schoenberg, Saigon, and you know, they were turned into British musicals.
Speaking of Miss Saigon, I get Richard Maltby as my guest next week. So
fantastic.
This question will continue to be discussed.
I'll tune in. That sounds fun.
Oh yeah, he's great. I just saw a new musical of his in a reading for Red Bull Theater. It was a benefit the other night. Let's see, what do we have?
Amy Stoller's right. Oliver, yes, that's true.
Oh, wait a
Uh,
second. What did you say about Oliver?
said Oliver was
Yes.
entirely British born.
And terrible. I'm going to go on the record and say
I love Oliver.
it's a horrible musical. It's a brilliant movie.
Well, and that was produced by David Merrick.
Yeah, I
The
don't.
movie.
I'm not a fan of the Oliver stage version. The movie I just thought was
We were again. So Martin
amazing.
and I were in London when Rupert Gould revived it at Drury Lane, the biggest theater in London.
He revived
op-
Sam Mendes' production.
Good point. And it has this amazing opening. And after the opening number, it was not good. It just wasn't.
So I was just quick because this was amazing. So they did a reality TV show to cast
right.
Oliver, cast the kid, right? They probably saw, I don't know, 2,500 kids for it. And the finalist list was 60 some odd kids, to which they chose whatever, the 3 or 4 Olivers you have to meet British child labor laws. But in the opening scene, the glorious food scene in the workhouse, all 60 kids did that scene every night. And that was an impressive sight.
And they came out of the orchestra pit, and they had built this platform, so probably about this wide, that ran parallel to the audience on the edge of the pit. And they all came out, and then they walked and kind of met in the middle and walked up stage. It was a cool coup de théâtre. It really was neat.
Yeah,
that was the best part of it. It was downhill from there.
This speaks to the fragility of plays and shows in terms of the writer's perspective, because you can write a wonderful, wonderful show and have a terrible, terrible production of it. We're very vulnerable as writers. So let's see, Ross. Are we missing other things?
Yes. There was a question. It said, Martin, is that because of the quote unquote star factor needed on Broadway versus London? I don't know what the is that refers to exactly.
I mean, well, there's a lot of British stars that are going to sell and do. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't sell here, but they sell there.
Right. Okay. But then you get a show that is just brilliant, like the Lehman trilogy, which came over with the original English cast, which was just great theater. And so, but I imagine that cast, Simon Russell Beale and Adrian Lester, and I can't remember the name of the potato, are big draws in the UK. So, I think the stars system is still that's film. But I think stars draw, and behooves you to get one in your show if you can. But
I mean, years ago, the Broadway League did a survey of audiences. This is maybe 20 years ago. What is the major reason you go to a musical, and what is the major reason you go to a play? And I think what that poll that they did that season proved remains true. People go to a play because of who is in it. People go to a musical, for the most part, because of what it's based on. That's what it's turned into.
That's what it's, okay, that's today.
That's what it's become.
Once upon a time, it wasn't that.
And it still sometimes stars, right? Hugh Jackman, Sutton Foster, and Music Man. Nobody cares if the show's any good or not. They're going to go see Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster.
I have to tell you, I resisted seeing that. I resisted, and finally, my nieces said that it was the one thing they wanted to see, and so I went to see it with them, and it was spectacular. Of course, again, Music Man is another one of my favorite musicals. I just love it. So we've sort of drifted into this whole thing about musicals. We were starting with development, the development process, and I think that Ross is waiting to give us some other questions.
Yes. The question was, what about non-musical plays, costs, and possibility in London?
Well, I can tell you exactly, because I'm working right now on a 3-character play that we did. It did kind of a reading here with Tyne Daly and John Glover and one of the stars of Fat Ham, and the producer is going to do it in London. We have a general manager. We're working on casting now. And that 3-character, 1-set play, the best budget I could create was $5.5 million.
Here.
And here, the cost of the show, not counting the bonds and deposits, which in England are out of control, but that's fine. The money you have to pay up front that comes back later. But not counting that, but with the reserve fund and advertising is $1.1 million. It's a no-brainer. And it can recoup in about 12 weeks at 60% capacity.
Well, that's also because there is more of a audience for plays in London. I swear this is true. I mean, I can't give you facts and figures about it, but I swear it's true that the British audiences are much more welcoming to plays than American audiences. American audiences are all looking for the big Broadway musical.
Well, it's
Well, that's why it used to just be a TK. Remember TKTS back before they redesigned the booth. There was a plays only line. Remember, there was nobody ever in it. You could just go right up if you wanted to see a play.
That's so
They
embarrassing.
don't even have that anymore. I just think they were sort of sad. That poor guy at the window was like, nobody's coming to my window.
Who's the loneliest man in New York? The guy,
That's right.
The guy at the plays only window for TKTS.
I think part of the difference with plays too, and it's different here than it is in London, is that, I mean, Broadway has become basically it's a tourist destination, and the audiences are primarily tourists. And for plays, the New Yorkers, the tri-state audience, the traditional theater audience, a lot of which is gone, but they still will go to plays, and they'll go to some musicals and stuff. But shows are driven by tourists. If you're doing a musical or a big play, if the tourists aren't coming, you're going to die. You just are. It's just, whereas in London, that's not true. In London, in England, the whole country are theater going people, and there's a small country. You can get from Edinburgh to London in 5 hours. They come down and see plays, and they come down and see musicals.
This comes back to our
much more local audience.
This comes back to a whole cultural thing. I mean, I can't believe how unsupportive our country is of the arts in general. It's shameful.
But we can't fix that.
No, we can't. But the one thing I want to say is sort of to salvage the aspirations of so many people in this room is Broadway is not the only final destination for a show. Just bear in mind that we're talking about commercial Broadway versus commercial London, and there's plenty of other life in the regional theaters. And the regional theaters, I think, are much more open to plays. If you write plays and you don't write musicals, you don't have to jump out a window right now. There's plenty of places that appreciate plays. There are plenty of markets for plays. I say this because I'm a playwright who writes plays.
For plays and for musicals, Bob. I mean, because part of what's happened in New York is the vast number of not-for-profits in New York have totally replaced off-Broadway, commercial off-Broadway, because they do the important new plays at the Public, at MTC. Roundabout does some, New York Theater Workshop. They're no longer being produced commercially. They're being produced for all these big, or not all big, but significant not-for-profits. And now they're doing a lot of musicals too, right? The Stuffs at the Public, Days of Wine and Roses at Atlantic, Spring Awakening at Atlantic. This is all happening. The mistake that we make, I think, that they don't make in London, is everybody thinks, oh, my show was a hit off Broadway, it has to go to Broadway. Nothing has to go to Broadway. Scottsboro Boys didn't need to go to Broadway. It was a death wish. They should have known that. I think they did know. The same with Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson and Title of Show and Passing Strange, Carolina Chains. These were not shows that today's Broadway audience would ever want to see. It was like, oh, we have
great
to go.
Shows. I mean, great shows.
Yeah. What happens a lot is people that write great plays. I don't think it was a great play, but a really good play, slave play, a huge hit at New York Theater Workshop, was turned into a flop twice on Broadway. And those things stick no matter how good your show is. Why would you turn your hit play into a flop? But that's what we do in America now. So time and time and time again. I don't know why.
Well, I think it's just people become so impassioned about the work that they can't imagine that audiences won't flock to see it. I mean, this
well, to your point, Bob, I mean, Cheryl Weisenfeld was one of the people responsible for moving Carolina Change originally from the Public when it went, and they knew they weren't going to make their money, but they just knew that they wanted to have it seen by a larger audience. So that was, But if you've got producers that are willing to do that, that's one thing. But to
Well,
Martin's point, I think
Margot Lyon produced Angels in America, thinking that it would be impossible to break even on that play, and it actually turned out to be successful. Who would ever thought 2 4-hour plays in a Broadway theater would actually work? But apparently, it worked better than they ever imagined. Nobody produced it because they thought it would make money.
But I think that, listen, I mean, by nature of the fact that we're in this crazy business, we all are filled with the passion and confidence that great art will find an audience and should find an audience. And we're always bewildered when we do good shows that if they don't sell, that they don't sell. And you start throwing, that's a conversation with other things. How do you keep a show that's not selling open?
By the way, in my little rant just now, I said Angels in America, didn't I? Or did I say?
You did. Yeah.
You did.
Dave, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, you're right. I should go.
Dave is going to see Merrily We Roll Along tonight, which starts at 7.
So,
okay, we'll
don't hate me for this. I have to thank my partner Martin for getting me a ticket to it. So you can blame Martin.
I was going last night, right? And I did, because I love this production. It's the best thing I've seen in New York in 20 years at least. And Dave really wanted to see it, and there was a chance he could see it, and then that fell apart with my Tony tickets. So I got him a ticket so we could all go last night. And we all get to the theater, and they scan his ticket, and the scanner goes, bzzz. I bought it for tonight instead by mistake.
Oh, oops.
So anyway, I thank Martin. I thank you, everybody. I'm sorry I have to cut it short. I do love these things. So send me a reminder about next Friday, Bob, because I'd love to hear that discussion.
Oh, okay. I will. I have to. I promise, Richard. I will call him Friday at 4:30. He was supposed to be my guest like a month or two months ago, and he fell asleep. So
no.
Hopefully.
Well, I'm glad it worked out, Bob. I know sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get Martin and I to come on board one of your panels, but we do enjoy them. So
I've been asking about a year and 2 months.
I know. And I'm sorry I have to leave, but as Martin reminds me.
But I did lose 6 months this year, Bob. So
good point. Take care, everybody.
What did that mean? Okay, thanks.
It means I was hit by a police car.
Oh, we really?
Yeah.
Oh, I
On
don't
June
think I
6th,
knew about that.
Going to the Metropolitan Opera.
Are you okay now?
Yeah. I mean, it's not perfect. My leg still hurts, but I'm walking and stuff. But yeah, it was.
Oh, wow.
It was exciting.
Ross, Martin also is going to have to leave soon. So can you toss the questions out and let's see if we can get them answered.
Yeah. Rob Hoffman asked, if you have seen Operation Mincemeat in London, do you think it will appeal to NYC audiences off-Broadway / Broadway?
Personally, I think no. I think it's a very, very English musical. And the story is part of their culture, and the movie Operation Mincemeat is a big cultural icon there, and it's not here. It could work, but it doesn't feel like that to me. I mean, I didn't see it. I've listened to the album. I know a lot of people involved that were in it, but it doesn't feel like a logical transfer. So it'll come over and run 5 years.
Okay.
There's another question, but I think it was answered.
What was Jane Jubin? Jane, what was your comment? Compound a success with a failure. Oh, that was about the moving the shows.
Yeah. Right, moving shows. Yep.
But people think they're going to be successful, Martin. They don't do it because they think they're being foolish. They think they believe in it. They can't imagine other people won't believe in it.
But what's interesting, Bob, about this, because we all know that the competition for theaters on Broadway and in London is fierce.
Yes.
And the theater owners are the gatekeepers. They decide what shows are done and what shows aren't done. They're the only people that decide that. And not just since the pandemic, but a lot more since then, there are more and more shows being booked into Broadway theaters, getting theaters, that it's not just me. I mean, you sit around with industry people and we all go, that show doesn't have a chance. And they open and they don't have a chance. We look at them and go, why is this show getting a theater when we know there's at least 10 times as many shows looking for theaters, when there's shows that are guaranteed to fail and theater owners are taking them, which is not in their best interest. That's been a change the last 7 or 8 years. That wasn't happening that much. I mean, they were taking shows that had some reason to exist, that they had some reason to hope the show would make them some money.
Well, they're still making their money as long as the show's there, but once they fall underneath a certain weekly gross, then they're evicted anyway. So maybe it's greed, maybe it's because they just want to fill the theaters as much and as frequently as they can. I don't know, and there's always the possibility that somebody sees it differently than you or I do, and they look at it and they say, I think this can make money. I know it seems obvious to you that it won't, but I don't think it's that obvious to the people that are in love with it, in love with the piece of theater that it is.
Right, but the theater owners aren't in love with any shows, except the few
Somehow
they put money
somehow
into.
they're persuaded. Somehow it's.
Well, I guess it makes
producer.
sense. The Schubert and Nederlanders both put money into Paradise Square, and I hope nobody in here did. But we saw the show in Chicago. It was one of the worst shows ever produced. It's one of the worst shows ever produced on Broadway. It was produced by a criminal. And there are the Schuberts and the Nederlanders and all these A-list people working on this show. And that defied everything I know about this industry and believed in. So you never know.
So if you dig up all the facts about that, somebody can write a play, I think.
I think so. Or a musical.
Or a musical, yeah.
A singing Garth Drabinsky. I don't want to see that. I'm sorry.
So it seems like, I think, I'm not sure if anybody else has any pressing questions. If you do put up a virtual hand, if you can.
We got one more.
We have one more.
How would we find UK producers who might be interested in developing/producing a new musical? SOLT? Some other organization? Is there an organization of hungry UK producers? And then John Ewing has a question.
I mean, I think like any place else is kind of, researching shows that have been produced in London that have a sensibility or something that relates to your show. That, someone has shown an interest in shows of a similar theme or similar style of music or similar kind of play, and then finding a way to approach them. You can usually find their office information on the web, but it's really having to find out what those plays are. It's having to understand that world rather than just blindly approaching, producers who might do plays.
We're gonna go to John Ewing in a second, but first I want to say to the room, anybody that came in late, please remember to put your email address into the chat so that we know that you're here and we can follow up with you and send you the chat and any other conversations that happen after this. John, your question.
Yes. How you doing, Martin? I took this class, this incredible foundations class earlier this year, and you were speaking and you spoke about the Broadway tax incentive. And I know that you mentioned that it kicks in at about $12.5 million spend, and 25% that goes directly to investors. Now, I want to know, in your opinion, I personally feel like maybe New York City kind of takes Broadway for granted a little bit, because I think that should be in effect for every show that makes it to Broadway. For example, in the state of Georgia, if you're going to make a film at a $600,000 spend of qualifying expenses, you get 30%, but that goes directly to producers, and it's at their discretion how they handle that. I just think that so many of the shows on Broadway are losing that. It's like a miracle to get there. And I didn't know that Broadway, had been producing more revenue and selling more tickets than all 10 sports teams in New York. So I'd just like to get your thoughts on that.
The thing with the tax credit here is there are certain expenses that qualify to be used against the tax credit. Some aren't, like advertising isn't. It's basically actual expenses for doing the show. But the US tax credit continues during the entire run of the show. And the maximum tax credit is $3 million, which is 25% of $12 million. So if you spend $12 million over the run of a show, producing it and running it, then the tax credit is $3 million. which will come back to the investors. It's very unclear when it comes back. It takes a long time sometimes. I don't really know because I've never done a show on that. I just produced a show in the UK that's now on tour in the US they have a thing called theater tax relief. And theater tax relief is different. It goes to the producer, not the investor. And theater tax credit only counts your expenses up until the first public performance, none of your running costs. And I finally figured out the math of this. So there are qualifying costs. Once again, you can't use your lawyer's fees, you can't use advertising, they don't count. But all the direct costs of the show do count. And the tax rebate you get is 45% of 80% of the costs that qualify. So when David and I were sitting here, we said, you know, the easy way to say that is the tax credit is 36% of the qualifying costs. So that's, you know, so like when I think about doing a show there for 1.2 million, about $800,000 will be qualifying. So 36% of that, which is about $300,000, will come back directly from theater tax relief. And you get it 6 weeks after you send in the application for it. The check comes back. It's not on some tax year thing because it's not going to investors. It's going to the production. So it's a much more direct, faster process. But they're both, you know, supportive. I mean, if you do a play, like some of the plays that were relatively successful, that probably did earn close to $3 million in a tax credit, and they cost $6 million to produce, that means before they earned any money back, they got half their investment back. So that's been a pretty good deal for plays, even plays that are disasters. If you're guaranteed to get half your money back, even if your play closes opening night, that's kind of appealing. But when the tax credit goes away, it's not going to be appealing anymore. And we hope it lasts forever. I know that you know, all of our politicians in the Broadway League, but all of our politicians are going to fight to keep that.
Well, on that note, I'm gonna say goodnight to everybody, and actually we're gonna stay. Everybody's gonna stay and hang out afterwards. But I want to thank Martin. I'm going to go into speaker view and say a few words to people out there in YouTube land and podcast land. Thank you for being with us today. I hope that the conversation was interesting for you, and I hope you'll come back and join us for more conversations, including.
Yeah. And we're all still doing this.
What?
We're all still doing this.
It's all still doing
this theater thing.
Oh, this theater thing.
Yeah.
So we're gonna. I just wanted to say to everybody that we're going to be here every week. Next week you can meet Richard Maltby. 2 weeks you can meet Sue Matsuki, who's a producer in the cabaret world. She's also a very wonderful cabaret performer. And then I've got things lined up for January. If you want to be invited to the room and be part of the conversation and maybe ask questions and meet my guests, email me because I can make it happen. I'm at trunltd@aol.com, trunltd@aol.com. And I want to emphasize that anybody can come and be with us for free, but we also suggest that this be a pay what you can situation so that we can actually make money and keep running. We've had some very good fortune at the end of the year, and I think that we're in very good shape. However, we need your support. So if at all possible, please consider donating to TRU. We have an end of year matching grant right now. So we have people that are going to give us $12,000 if you give us $12,000 or part of that. So consider donating at trudonate.com, trudonate.com. And that's it. Hope to see you again soon.